You weren't born believing you were broken. That belief was given to you, carefully, quietly, and over time, not by a villain, but by patterns, by confused parents, distracted teachers, wounded peers, by a culture that profits from your self-doubt. You were taught to mistrust your instincts, to fear your own voice, and to trade your truth for belonging. You were taught that failure meant shame, that emotions were weakness, and that pleasing others was more important than knowing yourself. None of this was your fault, but it became your foundation. And from that foundation, you built a self-image that wasn't real, only reactive, a mask stitched together by rejection, silence, and performance. The Stoics would have called this a false identity, a construct of impressions, not essence. They believed that at the core of every person was not damage, but reason, not shame, but choice. And so if you've been living inside a narrative you never wrote, now is the moment to question it, not to hate your past, but to reclaim your authorship. You are not the sum of who hurt you. You are the response you choose next. Somewhere along the way that you confused survival with identity. You became good at adapting, at reading the room, predicting moods, at avoiding conflict, chasing approval. But adaptation has a cost, and that cost is authenticity. You lost track of what was truly yours, your opinions, your needs, and your natural energy, because you were busy managing perception, performing peace, suppressing discomfort. This is how the lie grows, not in one moment of trauma, but in 1,000 quiet compromises. And with each one, you send a message to yourself. My truth is too much. My anger is dangerous. My desires are inconvenient. Over time, you stop listening to your own voice. You outsource your inner compass to the crowd, to the algorithm, to anyone louder than your silence. The Stoics warned us about this. Seneca said, "He who seeks approval from others abandons his control over self." They knew that the self, the true self, must be governed from within, not in arrogance, but in clarity. Because when you betray yourself to be accepted, you inherit a life that never truly fits. It looks fine from the outside, but inside you feel like a guest in your own mind, and no amount of success can silence that ache. You've been told to find yourself, but that's not quite right. You were never lost, you were buried beneath expectations and conditioning and quiet shame. The self is not something you find, it's something you recover. And to recover it, you must peel away what was never yours to carry. The Stoics called this process living in accordance with nature. Not nature as trees and rivers, but the nature within, the part of you that existed before the world taught you who to be. Marcus Aurelius didn't ask, "How do I become impressive?" He asked, "What part of me is mine and what part is noise?" This is the real work, not becoming better, but becoming true, because the lie isn't just a sentence, it's a system, a silent loop that repeats, "I'm too much, I'm not enough. If I slow down, I'll disappear." But what if the truth is this? You've never been too much. You've just been surrounded by people, too numb to receive you. And you've never been not enough. You've just been operating inside a script written by someone else's fear. It's time to exit the script, to step out of the costume and to ask, with radical honesty, what if nothing is wrong with me, except the belief that something is? So much of your exhaustion doesn't come from doing too much, but from being someone you're not. You perform safety, you perform confidence, and you perform being fine. And all the while that your body holds the tension, your breath shortens and your mind races and your spirit waits patiently, painfully, to be invited back in. This is why clarity feels like peace, because when you start telling the truth, your nervous system finally stops bracing for impact. The Stoics didn't teach people how to perform better. They taught people how to live better, to live with less noise, less pretending, less attachment to the roles assigned by others. Epictetus said, "First say to yourself what you would be, then do what you have to do. Not what others expect, and not what's most popular. What is yours, and this is your turning point, and not a revolution, but a return to simplicity and to self-respect, to the quiet power that only comes from knowing you don't need to impress anyone to be whole. You've tried everything else. Now try being fully, unapologetically you, and see how quickly the world starts to make sense again. You were never meant to be perfect, you were meant to be present, to live from the center of your being, not from the edges of other people's approval. But when you've been told your entire life that you need to fix yourself to be lovable, you forget what it feels like to just be. No mask, no role, just awareness and breath and intention. The Stoics didn't chase confidence, they chased coherence, a life where your actions match your values and where your thoughts match your truth. And that's the real cure for insecurity. Not self-improvement, self-alignment. Because confidence isn't loud, it's quiet, it's the silence inside you. When you're no longer negotiating your worth, you don't need to be more, you need to be real. And being real, it requires courage. It means unlearning, it means disappointing people who only loved your mask. It means standing in your truth, long enough for the discomfort to pass and the peace to arrive. The lie ends, not with anger, but with clarity. And with clarity comes energy, direction, stillness. You don't need to become someone new, you need to return to the person you were before the world told you to be someone else, and that return starts now. Focus is not just a skill, it's a form of respect for your time, for your mind, for the moment in front of you. But we've lost that. Not because we're lazy, not because we're weak, but because we've been conditioned to fragment. Swipe here, scroll there, jump between tasks, chase 10 things at once and finish none. It's not just distraction, it's disintegration of thought, of clarity, of peace. You wake up reaching for your phone. Before you've taken your first breath of the day, your attention is hijacked, split, scrambled, spent. By noon, your brain is already buzzing. You've checked 14 apps, consumed more content than a philosopher would read in a month, and processed 0. And yet you wonder why you feel exhausted before the day has even truly begun. The Stoics would call this a failure of orientation. They believed focus wasn't just about tasks, but about purpose. Epictetus said, "If a person doesn't know to which port they sail, no wind is favorable." You're not unfocused because you're broken. You're unfocused because your life is full of winds, but no chosen direction. And without direction, attention shatters, mind breaks, and energy leaks into everything and nothing. Your brain was never designed to handle this much input. Not this many voices, not this many decisions, not this many dopamine spikes per minute. When every moment is filled with stimulus, your mind stops processing and starts reacting. You don't think, you scroll. You don't feel, you swipe. You don't respond, you refresh. But the price you pay is subtle and devastating. Reduced working memory, shallow thinking, chronic mental fatigue, the inability to be alone with yourself. And when you can't be alone with yourself, you can't know yourself. You're just a reflection of what the algorithm says you should be. The Stoics weren't just philosophers, they were architects of internal stillness. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire but still carved space each day to sit with his mind, without distraction, without applause. He called it retreating into himself, not to escape the world, but to anchor his place in it. You have that same capacity, but you must create conditions for your mind to return to depth. That means silence, that means limits, that means resisting the urge to fill every gap with noise. Because focus isn't just a muscle, it's a sanctuary. And if you don't defend it, the world will take it from you. We often think attention is about discipline, that if we just try harder, we'll concentrate. But attention isn't just about effort, it's about environment. You can't focus in a space designed to distract you. Modern life is built to fracture your awareness, to steal your gaze one notification at a time. And when you live in that architecture, your willpower becomes the front line in a war it was never meant to fight alone. This is why the Stoics didn't rely on willpower. They relied on structure. They had rituals, routines, boundaries. They knew the mind was powerful, but also vulnerable, and it needed protection. So what does that look like today? It looks like removing temptation, not just resisting it. It looks like curating your input, like you curate your food. It looks like asking, is this helping me think clearer or just louder? Your phone, your feed, your habits, they aren't neutral. They shape the quality of your attention, and your attention shapes the quality of your life. So if your mind feels scattered, foggy, distracted, don't blame yourself. Blame the system around you. Then change it. Because clarity isn't found in trying harder. It's found in designing a life that makes clarity possible. Ask yourself, when was the last time you did nothing? Not scrolled, not planned, not consumed, just existed. Can you remember the last moment your mind was quiet without a screen to soothe it? Stillness has become so foreign that we confuse it with boredom. But boredom isn't a problem. It's a portal. Through boredom, the mind resets. Through silence, your real thoughts emerge. The ones that aren't viral, the ones that don't beg for likes, the ones that are yours. The Stoics made time for this on purpose. They practiced philosophical digestion, sitting in silence after reading, thinking, or reflecting, allowing their minds to absorb meaning instead of skimming life. Seneca once said, "To be everywhere is to be nowhere." And that is what most people live today. Everywhere online, nowhere inside. You don't lack focus. You've just never been taught how to make space for it. Space from the noise, from the constant call to be productive, reactive, reachable. Focus is what happens when you give your attention a home, a place of safety, stillness, and single purpose. You've built a mind that multitasks. Now it's time to build a mind that remembers what it's like to be here. So how do you begin rebuilding your attention? Not by downloading another app, not by forcing your brain to grind through fatigue, but by honoring your attention as something sacred, not just strategic. Here's what the Stoics might prescribe. Start your day in silence. Even 5 minutes before input can reset the nervous system. Protect your mornings. The first hour is mental soil. Plant distraction, and that's what grows. Plant clarity, and it changes your trajectory. Limit how often you check. Check your phone, your email, your feeds. Every check fragments the self. Walk without your phone. Feel your surroundings again. Breathe without stimulation. Let your thoughts settle. Reflect each night. Ask, where did my attention go today? Did I use it or lose it? Because focus isn't just about productivity. It's about presence. It's the art of returning to what matters most when everything else is screaming for you. The Stoics didn't chase every fire, they chose their fire. And you can too. You've given your mind away long enough. Now is the time to take it back. It's not failure that breaks you. It's repeating the same patterns and pretending they'll save you. That's the slow death, the one that doesn't announce itself, the one that disguises itself as normal life. Wake up late, rush through the day, scroll to numb, sleep in regret. Repeat. No violence, no crisis, just quiet erosion. And the worst part, you get used to it. You normalize the cycle, you start calling it personality. I'm just not a morning person. I've always been bad at follow-through. This is just how I am. But is it? Or is it just unexamined repetition? The Stoics warned about this. They feared stagnation more than suffering. Seneca said, "Life without design is erratic, and with design it is directed." Design begins with reflection, and reflection is rare today. Because in a world that worships speed, pausing feels like failure. But without pause, there is no course correction, no perspective, no upgrade. You don't rise by doing more, you rise by doing differently. But you can't do differently until you see clearly. And that means facing your patterns, not with shame, but with precision. Your habits are not random, they are messages about what you value, what you fear, and what you're avoiding. Every time you snooze the alarm, you're casting a silent vote for comfort over momentum. Every time you scroll past discomfort, you're training your brain to fear stillness. Every time you say, "I'll do it tomorrow," you're reinforcing a loop that doesn't serve the future you. The Stoics understood the gravity of repetition. They believed that what you do daily becomes who you are. That character isn't built in extreme moments, but in small, unseen choices repeated until they become identity. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." Your thoughts create actions, your actions create patterns, and your patterns become your prison or your liberation. The question is never, "Am I making progress?" The question is, "What am I rehearsing? What am I becoming excellent at, even if it's harming me?" Because repetition without reflection doesn't lead to strength, it leads to autopilot. And autopilot doesn't care if it's driving you straight off a cliff, as long as the route feels familiar. We've been trained to chase intensity, big goals, dramatic changes, overnight shifts. But what really shapes your life is what you repeat in silence. The subtle rituals, the automatic thoughts, the invisible cycles. And when those cycles go unexamined, they become your ceiling. The Stoics were obsessed with this. They didn't wait for breakdowns to initiate breakthroughs. They did a daily audit. Each night they asked, "What did I do today that weakened my character? What did I do that strengthened it? Where did I lie to myself?" This wasn't self-punishment, it was self-leadership, because they knew that a life unreviewed would quickly become a life unlived. In today's world, reflection is optional, and that's exactly why it's powerful. Taking 10 minutes to write, to examine your emotional residue, to ask yourself, "Am I becoming who I said I'd be?" is not a luxury. It's a lifeline, because without awareness you don't change, you just mutate the same pattern into new disguises. New job, same burnout. New partner, same fear. New year, same self-sabotage. So you must pause. You must reflect. Not just to correct course, but to reclaim authorship. To stop being the echo of your past and start being the architect of your next chapter. Reflection isn't about shame. It's about sovereignty. It's the moment you stop running from your patterns and start walking toward your power. Because what you refuse to look at doesn't disappear. It drives you, silently, relentlessly, until it becomes your fate. The Stoics believed that every habit was a vote, not for productivity but for identity. They weren't obsessed with results, they were obsessed with who they were becoming. And they knew that without examination, even good habits can turn toxic. Discipline without direction becomes self-punishment. Ambition without awareness becomes addiction. Kindness without boundaries becomes self-erasure. So the work isn't just to build routines, it's to build alignment, to ensure that what you do each day actually matches what you believe you're here to become. And that only happens through conscious pause, not once a year, not on your birthday, daily. Ask, is what I'm repeating making me stronger or just busier? Am I practicing peace or just perfecting performance? Because the goal isn't to do more, it's to do what matters, on purpose, with presence and without apology. So what's the Stoic path forward? It starts with this. Interrupt the loop, even for 1 minute a day. You don't need a 3-hour morning routine. You need 3 honest questions. 1. What did I repeat today that weakens me? 2. What did I repeat that strengthens me? 3. What must change before it becomes permanent? Write it, speak it, feel it, then act on it. Because reflection without correction is just intellectual entertainment. You are not here to collect insight. You are here to create impact on your own life first. The Stoics didn't reflect to feel better. They reflected to become better. And that's the difference between performance and practice. Performance wants approval. Practice wants truth. Truth leads to change, and change, repeated, becomes identity. That's the formula. So if you're tired of living the same day in slightly different clothes, if you're done calling self-betrayal a personality trait, then stop, pause, ask, realign. You don't need another motivational speech. You need an internal system that doesn't let you lie to yourself anymore. And that begins with a single commitment: to never repeat blindly what your wiser self would question. You think you're lazy, you think you lack motivation. But what if the truth is darker than that? What if you're not broken, just hijacked? By chemicals, by systems, by design. Your brain is wired for survival, not stimulation. It's meant to seek reward, but slowly, after effort, risk, and intention. But the world you live in delivers reward without cost, constantly, effortlessly. Scroll, ding, like, swipe, buy, refresh. Every hit feels small, but over time they flood your brain with dopamine, the neurochemical of pursuit. Not satisfaction, pursuit. And pursuit without resistance leads to burnout. Not just mental, but biochemical. It's called dopamine fatigue, and it's real. Symptoms: you can't focus. You're always tired. Nothing feels satisfying. You start things but can't finish them. You crave stimulation but feel worse after getting it. And you begin to believe it's just you, that you've lost your edge, that you're not disciplined. But the Stoics would say otherwise. They would say your mind has been trained to crave what weakens it. And that strength is not about resisting temptation, but retraining desire. Not to kill pleasure, but to reclaim sovereignty. Every time you get something instantly, you teach your brain that effort is optional. Every time you scroll for stimulation, you dull your sensitivity to real joy. And slowly you become numb, not depressed, not dead inside, just disconnected from depth. You eat, but don't taste. You watch, but don't feel. You move, but never arrive. This is the collapse of meaning under the weight of excess dopamine. And it's not just psychological, it's physiological. Because the more dopamine you flood, the more your receptors downregulate. That means your brain literally stops reacting to what once brought satisfaction. The solution isn't more stimulation, it's less. It's reset, detox, delay, discomfort. The Stoics practiced this intuitively. Seneca fasted regularly, not for physical health, but to prove he wasn't a slave to indulgence. Marcus Aurelius walked in cold, dark rooms before sunrise to remind himself that comfort was never the goal. Clarity was. They weren't anti-pleasure. They were anti-dependence, because once your joy is hijacked, your freedom is next. And the Stoics were obsessed with freedom, not political, but internal. Freedom from craving, freedom from impulse, freedom from the need to feel good every second of the day. You weren't meant to feel amazing all the time. You were meant to feel alive, which includes discomfort, stillness, even boredom. But today, boredom feels like death. A blank moment feels like something's wrong, so you fill it. With content, with noise, with sugar, with novelty. But the more you fill it, the emptier you feel. Because novelty without depth is emptiness in disguise. The Stoics understood that joy is not found in more, but in presence. They believed in training desire, not chasing it. Epictetus wrote, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control." That includes craving. That includes stimulation. That includes the constant need to be entertained. So what does this mean for you? It means you must interrupt the loop. You must become conscious of what you're consuming, not just with your mouth, but with your mind, because your inputs become your inner world. And a mind addicted to easy pleasure cannot sustain deep focus, real work, or meaningful love. This isn't about self-denial, it's about self-restoration. Your system needs a reset. not a reward. And so how do you reset? Not with a crash detox or another productivity sprint. You reset through discipline with intention. Start with small acts of resistance, tiny moments where you choose presence over pleasure. Delay the scroll. Sit with the craving. Eat in silence and walk without headphones. Wake up without checking your phone. These aren't punishments, they're reminders. Reminders that your brain can still be still, that your nervous system doesn't have to live on fire, that satisfaction doesn't come from the next thing, but from the current one, fully felt. The Stoics would say, make peace with discomfort, because only through discomfort does freedom return. Seneca trained his mind to feel hunger without panic. You can train yours to feel boredom without escape. Start by setting intentional friction between you and your easy hits. Turn your phone grayscale. Put it in another room. Schedule your dopamine windows, not to deprive yourself, but to recalibrate. Because discipline isn't about control, it's about clarity. And when your mind is clear, you don't need more dopamine. You feel alive with less. You don't chase highs, you notice what's already here. Your power isn't found in endless stimulation. It's found in mastery of attention. And mastery begins where compulsive consumption ends. You don't need to delete everything. You need to reclaim intention, reclaim the moment before you click. The space between desire and action. That's where your freedom lives. Marcus Aurelius didn't fear temptation. He met it with awareness. He watched it, understood it, and chose not to obey it. You can do the same, but not by force, by rhythm. Create a rhythm that honors your focus, one that protects your energy instead of bleeding it out. Ask yourself, what is this craving masking? What am I escaping from? Can I sit with this moment instead of running from it? Because every time you override the impulse, you train the mind to trust itself again. And that trust is what leads to peace, not the next hit, not the next fix, not the next, you got this video, just you, present, aware, and unhooked. That's the reset, not perfection, not purity. Just enough clarity to choose what's real over what's easy, again and again, until your mind becomes yours again. Trauma is not just what happened. It's what you told yourself about what happened. It's the moment of pain followed by a meaning your nervous system never stopped rehearsing. I'm not safe. I'm unworthy. It was my fault. No one will protect me. I have to stay small. The event passed, but the story stayed, and that story has been shaping your life ever since. Every relationship, every reaction, every opportunity declined, filtered through a lens you didn't choose consciously. The Stoics didn't use the word trauma, but they understood the power of interpretation. Epictetus taught that it's not events that harm us, but our judgments about them. You weren't hurt just by life. You were hurt by what you started to believe about yourself in response. And unless you rewrite that story, you'll keep living inside a version of reality built by fear, not truth. But rewriting doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering differently. It means updating your narrative to reflect the wisdom you've earned, not just the pain you survived. Because pain may be part of your past, but the meaning, that's up to you. Most people don't live with trauma. They live with unexamined stories repeating beneath their awareness, like background music, always playing, always influencing. You don't notice it directly, but it shapes your steps. It tells you who to trust, what to avoid, and what's too risky. But what if that music was composed by fear? What if your instincts were tuned to past danger that no longer exists? The Stoics believed in separating signal from noise. They trained their minds to see clearly, especially when emotion clouded perception. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are pained by an external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your judgment about it." Judgment isn't blame, it's interpretation, and interpretation can be challenged, not erased, refined. That's the work. To revisit your past, not to relive it, but to reclaim your authorship. To ask, what did I learn to believe about myself that was never true? What meaning did I inherit that I'm ready to release? Because healing isn't deleting memory, it's rewriting identity in the presence of truth. You said, you don't heal by pretending it didn't happen. You heal by telling the truth, but telling it better. Not to minimize the pain, but to remove the poison. Because what happened may not have been your fault, but keeping the old story alive, that's something you can choose to stop. The Stoics didn't dwell in the past, they used it to sharpen their clarity, to train detachment, to build resilience. Seneca said, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. He wasn't dismissing trauma, he was warning against the mental echo, the story that keeps ringing long after the blow has passed. Every time you replay what they said, what they did, what you lost, you strengthen a version of yourself that still feels powerless. But you're not powerless anymore. You're aware, you're watching, you're choosing. And that means you can change the script, not overnight, not through suppression and through narration. Try this. That happened, but it's not who I am. It shaped me, but I decide what it means now. Because meaning is never fixed. It's fluid. And you're the one holding the pen. Your nervous system doesn't speak English. It speaks patterns, repetition, signals of threat or safety. If you've been stuck in a trauma loop, your body has memorized the story even more than your mind. That's why logic doesn't fix it. You can know it wasn't your fault and still feel shame. You can know you're safe and still freeze when triggered. The Stoics understood that mastery of the mind must include mastery of response, not reaction, not suppression, but deliberate interpretation. To breathe instead of flinch, to observe instead of collapse, to interrupt the reflex with awareness. They practiced this daily, visualizing setbacks, preparing for discomfort, meeting pain with philosophy, not panic. You can do the same. Start by noticing when the old story shows up. Does your body tighten when you're challenged? Do you shut down when someone raises their voice? Do you assume rejection, even where there's none? These are echoes, not commands, and every time you witness the pattern without obeying it, you build freedom. Not by force, but by remembering you are no longer the version of you who had no choice. So what do the Stoics teach us about healing? Not to forget, not to detach coldly, but to reshape pain into principle, to transform memory into mastery. Marcus Aurelius faced betrayal, death, and pressure few can imagine, yet he wrote not from bitterness, but from clarity, because he refused to let what hurt him define who he became. That is your task too, to feel everything without becoming it, to hold your past without being held by it, and most of all, to choose your identity on purpose. Ask yourself, what am I still believing that no longer serves me? If I met my past self in that moment of pain, what would I say now from wisdom, not fear? Say it, write it, live it, because you are not broken. You are reassembled, piece by piece, truth by truth, until the story becomes strength. That's Stoicism, not the absence of emotion, but the presence of power in the middle of it. Your past happened, but what it means going forward, that's yours to define. Readiness is a myth, a polished illusion designed to keep you waiting just long enough to never begin. You tell yourself, when I feel more confident, when things calm down, when I have more clarity. But clarity doesn't come before action. It's the byproduct of action, of motion, of trying, failing, and refining. The Stoics never waited to feel ready. They acted because the moment existed. Epictetus said, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Not feel, not prepare endlessly, do. The myth of being ready is rooted in fear, fear of judgment, fear of discomfort, fear of becoming visible before you're perfect. But perfection is a moving target, and if you chase it, you'll always find a reason to delay. So you stay in research mode, in planning, in rearranging the to-do list. But what you're really doing is protecting yourself from exposure. The Stoics would call that self-deception, because waiting to be ready is often a clever disguise for staying small, for staying safe. But safety rarely leads to purpose, only movement does. You gain confidence not by thinking differently, but by doing consistently. Each small act of courage, especially when you're unsure, builds a bridge back to trust in yourself. But that trust isn't built through theory, it's built through friction. When you push through resistance, you rewire the brain. You teach it that discomfort is not danger, that uncertainty is not a reason to freeze, that forward movement doesn't require full control. The Stoics practiced this daily. Marcus Aurelius woke up and reminded himself that difficulty was part of the deal, not a glitch, a feature. He didn't wait to feel brave. He acted as if courage were already his, and in the process made it so. Confidence follows commitment, not the other way around. But in modern life, we've reversed the order. We believe we need to feel right before we act right. But emotion is unstable. It shifts with sleep, with blood sugar, with a comment from a stranger. Action, though, action anchors you, gives you proof, rebuilds identity in real time. And identity is what shapes your future. Not potential, not talent, not good intentions. Identity built in motion. We often admire discipline in others but forget where it starts. It doesn't start with motivation. It starts with a decision made in silence and repeated without applause. Discipline is doing what must be done because it aligns with who you are becoming, not because you feel like it today. The Stoics called this living in accordance with nature. Not external nature, but your inner nature. The deeper voice beneath fear, fatigue, and excuses. And that voice speaks only when you move toward the thing you fear. Want clarity? Start. Want strength? Act. Want to believe in yourself again? Show yourself something worth believing in. Because courage is not loud, it's often invisible. A private refusal to keep waiting for conditions that may never come. And readiness? It's revealed in hindsight. You look back and realize, I wasn't fully prepared, but I moved anyway, and that's why I grew. The goal isn't to eliminate fear, it's to walk with it long enough for it to lose its grip. You'll never be ready in theory, but you'll always be further along after one honest step, even if it's small. Even if it's shaky, especially if it's shaky. You said, so what holds you back from starting? Usually it's a story, a mental script that says, well, I'll mess it up. People will judge me. I'll look stupid. I'm not the kind of person who does this. But all of those statements are written in fear, not in fact. And fear is convincing until it's confronted. The Stoics didn't eliminate fear. They trained their response to it. They asked, is this fear useful? Does it point to something I can control? Or is it a phantom, a shadow I've never questioned? Seneca wrote, we are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality. That line alone has the power to dismantle entire years of hesitation, because what if you're not afraid of failure? What if you're afraid of shedding the old version of yourself that was comfortable in doubt? What if being ready isn't something you wait for, but something you become by breaking character, by taking the action your old self would avoid? That's the moment your identity shifts, not when the task is done, but when the lie that said, I can't, is finally challenged. Here's the Stoic prescription. Do the thing, even badly, especially badly, because a sloppy beginning is worth infinitely more than a perfect plan that never leaves your head. Every master once looked like a beginner. Every bold voice once cracked with doubt. And every version of your future self is waiting on a decision you could make today. Ask, If I stopped waiting to be ready, what would I do next? What action could I take that contradicts the small version of me I've been rehearsing? Then take it, not because you're fearless, but because fear no longer gets to drive. The Stoics would remind you, life doesn't wait, and purpose doesn't beg for permission. It shows up in motion, in honesty, in execution, not perfect, just present. You'll feel unqualified, you'll feel exposed, you'll want to retreat. Don't stand there in the discomfort, in the mess, in the unknown, because that's where the transformation begins, not when you're ready, but when you decide you've waited long enough. Healing has become a brand, a buzzword, a never-ending project. You scroll through endless posts, each promising a deeper layer, a more profound version of yourself, if you just keep doing the work. But what if the work wasn't about fixing yourself? What if you're not broken, just misaligned, not damaged, just disconnected from what you already know to be true? The Stoics didn't chase healing. They chased harmony between action and value, between who they were and how they lived. Seneca didn't sit around analyzing wounds. He acted in accordance with virtue. Marcus Aurelius didn't journal to self-soothe. He wrote to clarify and align his thoughts, his principles, his next step. You don't need to become a new version of yourself. You need to become consistent with the voice you've silenced. That quiet inner authority you override every time you choose comfort over character. That's not trauma, that's avoidance. And avoidance doesn't need healing, it needs interruption, realignment, honesty, because a fractured life isn't always caused by pain. Sometimes it's caused by living a life you no longer respect. We confuse healing with postponement. I'll take action when I feel whole. I'll speak up when I'm more confident. I'll show up when I've figured everything out. But that day never comes because wholeness isn't found in waiting. It's found in alignment, doing the right thing even when you feel incomplete. The Stoics never claimed to be healed. They claimed their responsibility. Epictetus was enslaved, mocked, beaten, and discarded. He didn't wait to feel safe before he started thinking freely. He reclaimed his mind long before he could reclaim his freedom. Because healing isn't a requirement for integrity. You can still live with honor while carrying pain. You can still choose discipline while grieving. You can still act with virtue while wounded. This is not denial, it's direction. Pain doesn't make you less worthy. It gives you more context, more depth, more reason to live aligned so the pain doesn't define you. Ask, what values am I betraying in the name of healing? What am I postponing that would actually begin the healing itself? Because sometimes the cure is not another journal entry. It's an action that proves you still remember who you are. We've been taught to chase healing like it's a finish line, some distant version of ourselves that finally feels ready, pure, free of scars. But the Stoics didn't seek purity. They sought clarity, because clarity leads to aligned action, and aligned action is the most underrated medicine there is. You feel fragmented not because you're broken, but because you're living in a split. One self that knows what matters, another self that avoids it. And that gap between value and behavior is where shame lives, where exhaustion builds, where anxiety grows without language. You don't need to fix that with another podcast. You need to close the gap with one small act of alignment. Say the thing you've been holding back. End the thing that dishonors you. Begin the thing that's been whispering in your gut. Not because you're healed, but because you're tired of abandoning yourself. Marcus Aurelius never claimed to be perfect. He just refused to act out of sync with his conscience. You can do the same. Start where you are, with what you know, even in pain. Especially in pain, because pain is not always a signal to pause. Sometimes it's an invitation to return, to center, to character, to the version of you that still believes in truth. We often say, I need to heal before I can trust again. But trust isn't given, it's rebuilt by showing up differently than you did when you were hurt. And the only way to do that is through action aligned with truth. The Stoics weren't naive. They understood suffering, loss, abandonment, fear. But they didn't ask, how do I feel safe again? They asked, how do I act with integrity despite fear? That question changes everything, because healing isn't about creating perfect conditions. It's about reclaiming agency right where you are, in your body, in your space, in your choices. You align by living the answer to this simple question. If I fully respected myself today, what would I do? Not tomorrow, not when you've journaled enough, not after you forgive everyone, today. And the answer will feel small, simple, sometimes terrifying. But that's where change hides, not in analysis, but in alignment. One honest decision pulls your soul back into your spine. One act of truth interrupts years of numbness. One refusal to betray yourself again can do more than 1,000 affirmations. Because alignment isn't a mood, it's a practice. And it starts with one brave, imperfect step. Here's what the Stoics knew. It's not suffering that breaks you. It's betrayal of self. When you say yes while meaning no. When you stay silent to keep peace while your soul is screaming. When you keep delaying the life you know is waiting for you. You don't need healing from the world. You need reunion with your own honesty. And that's not a mystical process. It's practical, it's gritty, it's daily. You wake up, you listen, you ask, what would alignment look like today? What would be one small act that brings my behavior closer to what I claim to believe? Then you do it, even if your hands shake, even if no one sees, even if your old self resists, especially if your old self resists, because healing isn't a state, it's a shift, from avoiding to approaching, from overthinking to doing, from pretending to remembering that your peace was never lost, just buried beneath 1,000 compromises. And alignment is how you dig it out, not in one grand gesture, but in the quiet bravery of being truthful when it would be easier to wait. You're not here to wait anymore. You're here to walk forward, imperfect but aligned. There comes a point when self-help isn't enough, when you realize you don't need another concept. You need a rebuild, not a renovation, not a touch-up, a structural transformation from the inside out. The Stoics never promised quick fixes. They promised a way of life, a system for becoming someone who can be trusted by their own soul. It starts with a simple truth. You cannot build a new life with the same frame of thinking that built the old one. So first, you strip it down. You tear away the coping habits you've mistaken for personality, the sarcasm that hides your tenderness, the procrastination that masks your fear, the overachievement that numbs your emptiness. Not to shame yourself, but to see clearly. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If it's not right, don't do it. If it's not true, don't say it." That's a blueprint, simple, ruthless, freeing, because integrity is not about being perfect. It's about no longer living in contradiction. And contradiction is the true source of your mental fatigue. So the rebuild begins here, by removing what doesn't belong so that what's real has room to grow. You said you don't need a new identity, you need a clean foundation, one built on values, not trends, on action, not image, on reality, not self-concept. The Stoics didn't waste time constructing elaborate personas. They lived by principle, and let that be their reputation. They knew that a life built on appearances is always at risk of collapse, but a life built on truth, that endures. So ask yourself, what parts of my current life were built just to be tolerated? What have I agreed to that now feels like betrayal? These are your fault lines, cracks in the structure that must be addressed before you build higher. The Stoic method is surgical. Cut away what is false with precision and replace it with what is aligned. This might mean walking away from relationships that feed your wounds, or from habits that comfort you while secretly corroding your spirit. It might mean saying no when you're used to pleasing, or saying yes to the discipline you've delayed. Reconstruction is uncomfortable, but it's clean, honest, permanent. Because once you lay new brick on solid values, the life that grows around it is one you no longer need to escape from. Once the structure is cleared, you begin to rebuild. Deliberately, habit by habit, word by word. Not with aesthetics, with integrity. You define what matters, then you design your days to reflect that. The Stoics didn't wait for the world to agree with their philosophy. They lived it, quietly, consistently, until it reshaped their identity. Marcus Aurelius didn't just write his values, he rehearsed them, reinforced them, reviewed them each night so that they became his reflexes under pressure. You must do the same, because what you repeat you remember, and what you remember shapes what you believe. Start small. Speak only what you mean. Move when you say you will. Sit with discomfort instead of fleeing it. These are not gestures, they're reinforcements, bricks. Bricks in the mental structure of a self that is built to last. One act of honesty is stronger than 100 affirmations. One morning of discipline is more transformative than a month of wishful thinking. This is how character is constructed. Not in rare moments of brilliance, but in ordinary moments reclaimed through clarity and repetition. You are not rebuilding for appearance, you are rebuilding for resilience, for the moment when life shakes you. And you don't collapse, because your strength isn't performative, it's structural. The Stoics trained for adversity long before it arrived, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. They understood that life is not a question of if hardship comes, but when. And when it does, what holds you together is not motivation. It's your framework, your rituals, your standards, your mental architecture. Ask yourself, what am I building that will still hold when the applause stops, when the plan fails, when I'm alone? That's where true reconstruction lives, not in public performance, but in private alignment. Do you speak the same when no one's watching? Do you uphold your principles when it costs you comfort? If not, start there. Because a self worth trusting is one that survives contradiction, a self that stands even when tempted to fold. Rebuilding from the inside means building for storms, not spotlights. It's slower, less glamorous, but far more powerful. Because when the world changes around you, you won't need to rebuild again. You'll already be whole. So what does a fully rebuilt self look like? It's not someone without flaws. It's someone who no longer abandons themselves when things get hard. Someone who lives in alignment even when it costs. Someone who can sit with pain without needing to numb. Someone who can speak truth without needing to shout. The Stoics weren't superhuman. They were just structured. They built lives that could hold them, not lives that needed constant escape. You can do the same. Start now, not by doing more, but by doing what matters with more honesty. Let go of roles, let go of survival scripts, let go of stories that no longer serve you. Ask, what would a life built on truth actually look like for me? What habit, if done every day, would make me someone I deeply trust? Then begin. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for the fear to vanish. Just build one brick of action, 1 hour of clarity, one decision that honors the self you're becoming. Because this time, you're not building to impress, you're building to last. You will die, not someday. Every day you are already dying. The Stoics didn't whisper this, they repeated it, they engraved it, they lived by it. Memento mori. Remember you must die, not to be morbid, not to provoke fear, but to awaken clarity. Because when you forget death, you drift. You postpone, you settle. You argue over nonsense, you chase approval. You waste hours scrolling through lives you'll never live. But when you remember death, you remember what matters. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You could leave life right now, let that determine what you do and say and think." It's not a warning, it's a compass. Because death is the only certainty, the only guarantee. And once you truly face that, you stop asking, what will they think? And start asking, what will I regret not doing? Memento mori is not a threat, it's a gift, a stripping away of distraction, a sharpening of focus, a radical return to the present. Not later, not eventually, now. You've been taught to avoid death, to speak of it softly, to treat it like a far-off event, something for old age, for hospitals, for others. But the Stoics saw death not as an interruption to life, but as its sharpest mirror. They used it daily, as a mental discipline, as a decision-making tool, as a filter for what was worth energy and what wasn't. Ask yourself, if I only had 1 year left, what would I stop tolerating? What would I start saying? Who would I become? Now that the illusion of someday is gone, that's not a morbid question. It's the most alive question you can ask. Because once you remember your time is finite, your decisions become pure. You stop delaying the conversation, you stop protecting your ego, you stop chasing goals you don't even believe in. You begin pruning the unnecessary, trimming the excess, sharpening your path. Seneca wrote, "Life is long if you know how to use it." But most don't, because most forget that time is not just money, it's identity, and you're spending it with every yes, every scroll, every breath. So the question isn't, how long will you live? The question is, how long will you stay awake while you do? Most people die long before their hearts stop beating. They die in routine, they die in avoidance, they die in perfectionism, waiting for the right time to begin. But the Stoic sees death not as an ending, but as a clarifier. Because when you measure life backwards, everything shifts. You stop asking, what do I want to achieve? And start asking, what do I want to be remembered for? And legacy isn't some grand headline in history books. It's the quiet echo of your daily choices. It's how you show up when no one's watching. Death teaches you that what you do today is the story people will tell when you're gone. And so what are you teaching them? That you played it safe? That you talked about potential but never lived it? Or that you lived on purpose, without needing approval, without waiting for the green light, without rehearsing your life like a draft no one will ever read? You don't control how or when you die, but you control the shape of your time until that moment comes. The Stoics would say, live now, not in theory. Live as if your days were currency, and spend them only on what you'd gladly trade your life for. You don't need to fear death, you need to fear never having lived fully, because regret is the real ghost that haunts people, not failure, not rejection, but the quiet ache of time misused. The Stoics weren't obsessed with dying, they were obsessed with not wasting the living. Every action was measured, every moment was earned. They didn't chase immortality, they chased impact, and not through scale, but through presence. You don't need to reach millions, you need to show up to the one life you've been given, to the breath in your chest, to the truth you keep avoiding, to the words you need to say before it's too late. Seneca warned, it's not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. So ask yourself, where is my time bleeding out? What am I giving years of my life to that I won't even remember next month? What matters that I keep postponing? This is not about pressure, it's about presence. Because every day you delay your calling in favor of comfort, you trade meaning for numbness, and eventually the clock stops, and the choice is no longer yours. And so how do you live with death in mind without falling into fear? You use it as a compass, a calibration tool, a moment-to-moment reminder that nothing is guaranteed except this breath, this step, this choice. The Stoics didn't just remember death, they used it to amplify life. Marcus Aurelius didn't see death as a thief. He saw it as motivation. Every injustice he endured, every hard choice he faced, was filtered through the question, if this were my last act, would it be worthy of me? That is how you rise, not through external achievement, but internal alignment with the shortness of time. You don't need more hours, you need more intention. You need to wake up each day and declare, this is not a rehearsal. I will not outsource my values. I will not sleepwalk through the miracle of being alive. And when you do, something shifts. Decisions become clearer. Distractions lose power. Small moments gain gravity. You stop waiting for the right life to begin. You begin it, right now. Inside the only clock that matters, your own heartbeat. Memento mori, not a threat, a sacred reminder, live now.